welcome to another video. And I thought it would be fun to expand on last week's video where I curated a 12 color palette for myself. And I'm really happy that a lot of you enjoyed it. This is the palette that I chose. I really appreciate your feedback, and yeah, I'm glad it was an enjoyable video that kind of showed, I would say, a relatively unique color palette where you know, compared to what you usually see out there. And this is by no means me telling you that, you know, my palette is better than anyone else's. But the point of this is just to show you something that I think every artist should aspire to, and that is to have your own signature color story in, you know, obviously you don't use every single color in that palette in every painting, but it's one part of creating authentic, unique art. This is only one part. Of course, there are like many other factors, like the subjects you paint and the style you paint them in and your brushes and your brush strokes. But this is one way. And so I thought it would be fun today to expand my color palette. I have to tell you that coming up with 24 colors, it wasn't hard for me, but I also really feel confident just having those 12 colors that I showed you. The difference is, I want to again kind of emphasize this point. This palette that I'm going to show you today, it's not about maximum versatility. If you want maximum versatility, you should approach this in a different way. You can see this in many kind of ultimate mixing palettes. Daniel Smith, for example, has a great one curated by Jane Blundell, and that one will give you almost like infinite options. I'm not about that, because there are a lot of colors on the color wheel I don't like and never use, and I don't need a palette that can theoretically mix colors that I never use. I will also like to say that my color palette changes and develops and grows, and I fall in and out of love with colors. And so this is kind of just a representation of where I'm at this moment. And I hope this will encourage you and kind of give you the confidence to create your color palette and leave out of it colors that don't excite you and that you don't feel you need them, even if, you know, your favorite teachers tell you this is a must-have color. There is no such thing. You should do what you love. So let's get started. Color number one is Buff Titanium. I won't go into much detail about the colors that were in last week's video. So if you want to hear more about them, go to that video. Buff Titanium. Now I decided to add to my 24 palette Naples Yellow. I love this color. I use it a lot. It creates beautiful corals when I mix it with any of my bright pinks. And I'll try to make an example here. So Naples Yellow. This is as you can see, a light, buttery, semi-opaque, quite opaque yellow. Every brand makes this. I find them to be quite different, especially if you're very particular with certain colors, and I am very particular with Naples Yellow. My favorite version is the Schmincke one, and I've used it for years and years and gone through several tubes, and I just really love their version of it. It's like 4 pigments, but I just think it's really beautiful. Okay, moving on to my next yellow, which is Nickel Azo Yellow. And that was also a part of my 12 color palette. Next, I decided to add Quinacridone Gold. Quinacridone Gold is a super popular color that you will find in many palettes. It is a beautiful, as you can see, like orangey yellow. It's pretty orange, I would say. But it has like an earthiness to it. It's transparent. It's a pushy color, even though now actually Nickel Azo Yellow is pushing it a little bit here, which is kind of surprising because my Quinacridone Gold, I think, is from Qor, and Qor tends to push other colors. Anyway, Quinacridone Gold is beautiful. It's beautiful for landscape. It's beautiful for florals. It is lovely for mixing kind of natural greens with something like ultramarine blue, because it doesn't create like those garish greens. It creates really beautiful natural greens. I do like to use it for me. If I didn't have something like olive green in my palette, I would use Quinacridone Gold to mix greens with French ultramarine. I want to talk about my expansion of my palette, that you will see that I choose to kind of expand those areas in the color wheel that I particularly enjoy. And so for some people, an approach, if they're expanding a palette, they would add, you know, if you have like the color wheel, then they would add maybe like an orange and then a red orange. That would be a good approach. If you like those colors, of course, you should include them. It will give you more versatility. But as I said, I'm not after versatility here. I want to create my particular color story. And so I really like kind of these yellows and also something like, you know, a Naples Yellow. So I choose to kind of expand this area of the color wheel. And you'll see that again and again throughout the curation of my palette. And you should do the same and not think that, you know, you should include a different color to get more versatility, but instead choose a variety of colors that you love. And, you know, maybe just like one day I'm in a mood for this kind of yellow and one day I'm in a mood for this kind of yellow. But I have to tell you that I also have paintings where I use multiple yellows. So that's just me. The next color is Naples Yellow Reddish, which I've talked about. Next, I'm going to show you the pinks that I chose. So in the 12 palette, I had just one pink, and it was Bright Rose, which is my favorite pink and the one I use in most of my paintings. But I do have a couple of others that I enjoy. And the first one is Carmine from Van Gogh. This is an extremely affordable watercolor. Carmine is pretty common, but I actually haven't really found a version that I like, or that I like as much as the Van Gogh version. So you can see this is a warmer pink. It's not like a blue pink. It's warmer than my Bright Rose, as you can see. But it's very, very vibrant, transparent, and lovely. And it creates just beautiful corals when I mix it with any of my yellows, but especially these two that have some sort of opacity to them. So this is Carmine from Van Gogh. Next, one that I fall in and out of love with, but classical color that you will see in many people's palettes. Quinacridone Rose is just a very kind of strong, nice primary color to have in your palette. I like the Daniel Smith version. It's brighter than other versions I've tried, and I do use it sometimes. And next, of course, my go-to, which is Bright Rose from Holbein. Okay, moving on to the violets. So in my 12 palette, I had Cobalt Violet, and I think I will add it now. I love Cobalt Violet and always want to have it in my palettes. And next, I decided to add a convenience color, which I love and use occasionally. Lucy! There's a cat here. And that is Rose of Ultramarine. This is a Daniel Smith convenience mix of Quinacridone Rose and French Ultramarine. I really like it. It's a pretty color. You can see it has that blue granulation from the French Ultramarine or Ultramarine blue. It's PB29, that's the pigment, and I really like it. So it's in my palette. Next, I decided to add another convenience color, although with this palette I wouldn't be really able to mix it. This is Lavender. This is a color that is most of the time formulated by adding white to ultramarine blue, and I really like it. I really enjoy it, and it creates really interesting neutrals with this color here, the Naples Yellow Red, Reddish. And I sometimes really like adding these, both of these colors. As you can see, they're not super intense. They're both opaque. And I just like their kind of dusty, light combinations. I love using these kind of neutrals when I paint florals and also like sea scenes or scapes. It just kind of adds a bit more depth to areas that otherwise I might consider leaving white, but instead choose to add something like this. And you can see the beautiful granulation of the lavender, which comes from the ultramarine blue pigment. So I really enjoy this color and use it occasionally in my paintings. And now it's Mother French Ultramarine. I have in my palette the Rembrandt version. Every company makes French Ultramarine, and they vary slightly. Some are a little bit more granulating, some are like a little bit, you know, redder. Very, very minor differences. So I would just get what is available to you. Rembrandt is a European brand and they come in 20 ml tubes, so I can stock up without breaking the bank. It's a color I use a lot. So as you can see, again, I'm just like expanding on those areas in the color wheel that I personally love. If you wanted to go from a similar 12 color palette that I have to something that is a bit more versatile, I would consider, you know, dropping one of the pinks or the yellows and adding something like a cadmium red light, something like that. That would give you more versatility. And then I would also consider adding a different blue. So I chose not to because I simply, you know, even when I have these colors in my palette, I just don't find myself using them. But it would definitely add versatility to your palette. Something like this. This is Cerulean Blue Chromium. I have, I think, the Aquarius version. Daniel Smith has a very nice version of this. I think most brands have a nice version of this color. So that would definitely give you some versatility. But yeah, I choose to go a different way. So I wanted to include, to show you, the next area in the color wheel would be the turquoises for me after blue. And here I decided to go with 2 cobalts. So you could choose something more transparent, more intense, something like phthalo turquoise, or I think Daniel Smith has an ultramarine turquoise. So you could do something like that. I don't like those colors, so I prefer the cobalts, which are granulating and more earthy. And I have here cobalt turquoise, and then next to it cobalt teal. And you can see these colors are similar, but this one is a little bit more muted. And I like them both. If I had to choose one, it's always cobalt teal, it's no competition. But I also like the cobalt turquoise. Now, check the names and swatches because every manufacturer has a different name. I think Schmincke calls theirs, like this color, they call it like cobalt green turquoise, something like this. So check the names. And then this color, the brighter one, is sometimes called teal, sometimes turquoise, so it can be confusing. Make sure you're buying the color that you want. Just check swatches and stuff. Okay, moving on to the greens. Again, I'm just expanding on my kind of greens. And the first one will be Cascade Green, which I have talked about in the previous video. Very, very unique green. It's made from phthalo blue and one of the like earth pigments. I don't have those in my palette. I don't want them in my palette. So for me, Cascade Green is a good choice of a color that I probably, maybe I could mix it with what I have or something similar, but I like it as it is. It works really well for me. Okay, so a couple more greens that I decided to add. So the first color I want to show you is actually a very unique color, and I sometimes like to use it when I'm playing with kind of the lighter tones in my painting. This is Fuchsite Genuine from Daniel Smith, and as you can see, it's kind of like a minty color. I like this color, but I also like a color by Sennelier, which is called Emerald Green, that doesn't have, this has like a little sheen to it. It's not really metallic, but it does have a sheen. It's not flat like my other watercolors here. Sennelier's Emerald Green is flat, and it's beautiful, and it's very, very unique. It is very similar in the tone and the color to Daniel Smith Fuchsite, but as I said, it doesn't have that sheen to it, and I actually most days prefer that, but I didn't have it right now in my palette, and for the purposes of this video, I think this is sufficient. If you have white in your palette, you could mix some cobalt teal, white, and maybe a little touch of something like Naples Yellow, and you can create your own. Okay, moving on to the greens. In the 12 color palette, I only had one kind of, I would say, true green. The Cascade Green is almost a turquoise, which is olive green. And obviously I'm including it also in this palette, but I also added, I use green in many of my paintings because I paint a lot of florals, and also when I paint abstracts I like to use it, and sometimes even in like beach scenes I would use it. So I like to have a variety, and I always mix a lot of my colors in my paintings. So rarely do I use a color in my painting just in its pure form. I like to introduce colors by mixing them with others and then also add them in their pure form. This is Undersea Green, and it's from Daniel Smith, and it's just a lovely, again, kind of earthy green that is more on the yellow side, I would say, than kind of like than on the blue side. Really love how it looks with all of my pinks and violets, and I use it occasionally in my paintings. Next we have, yeah, I'll put it here. Next we have Dusk Yellow. This is a color by Rembrandt, and it is just like a granulating earthy green that I also like to use. And the next one will be Olive Green, which I've talked about in the previous video. Really, really like this color. So that's the expansion of my green area. And now I have the one kind of earth tone from the previous video. This one is Hematite Violet Genuine. I've talked it in the previous video, so I'll spare you this time. Now I have 4 colors left, and I decided to just add 2 darker granulating colors, because that's what I use on my paintings. So the newer ones that I'm choosing to add are Bloodstone, which is again from Daniel Smith, and you will see it's just kind of like, I would call this a black. It's a neutral, very, very neutral, the most neutral color in my palette. I don't have any grays. Well, that's not true. I have buff titanium, so I take that back. But this is Bloodstone. And if you wanted to kind of limit your palette, you could definitely include something like Bloodstone or Lunar Black or Oxide Black and mix versions of, you know, something like Dusk Yellow or Dusk Pink, which I'll show you. You can mix it yourself. Every brand, I think, makes a granulating black, like usually it's called Oxide Black. I have found the Daniel Smith Lunar Black to be the most granulating. So that's my personal choice, but I have to say I kind of rarely use it. Maybe I should use it more because I do like the effect it creates with other colors. So maybe I should include it in my palette to give myself more versatility. Okay, and now the last addition to this expanded palette is Dusk Pink, which is again from Rembrandt, and it's basically pink mixed with a granulating black. So a convenience color. You could mix your own if you have a pink and a granulating black. And then the last two that were included in last week's palette are Moonglow and Zoazite. And I have to say, for me, this is a pretty complete palette. I would consider switching maybe Quinacridone Rose or Carmine with something like Quinacridone Coral, or other companies call this Quinacridone Red, which is just basically like a lovely coral color. I think this is from Winsor & Newton. This is called Quinacridone Red. I think every brand makes this. So I would definitely consider this. And also I would consider something like Cadmium Red. But I have to tell you that I would probably drop one of my greens or darks before I would switch out one of my yellows and pinks, because yellow and pink are major colors in most of my paintings and I just like to have options. So this is the Holbein Cobalt Red Light. So as you can see, a very orangey, granulating red. And then this one is the Winsor & Newton Quinacridone Red. Again, very common color that many brands make. So maybe I should add it to my palette. It's so pretty. Feel free, or I would love to see your color stories. If you share them on social media, you know, you can always tag me, or if you have like a video on YouTube, leave a link below. And I think it's always fun to see how other people choose color and be inspired by those choices.